headlines on this Tuesday, October 15th, here on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea blows up parts of the inter-Korean roads on its side of the border earlier today, according to South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Moscow is taking steps to ratify its defense pact with Pyongyang that pledges swift military assistance if either one faces aggression. Meanwhile, back on the local front, President Yoon Suk-yeol hosts his 29th public forum on government policies, this time on the southern resort island of Jeju, pledging to promote tourism and sustainable growth there. We start here on the Korean Peninsula, where North Korea has detonated segments of the inter-Korean roads on its side of the border. For details on this latest development, I have our defense correspondent Kim Bo-kyung standing by live on the line. Bo-kyung, when did the detonation take place?
Hi, Sunny. The regime blew up roads on the northern side of the Gyeonggi and Donghae railway lines that connect the two Koreas. The Gyeonggi line roads were detonated at 11:59 a.m. and the Donghae roads at 12:01 p.m. The Koreas were connected by roads and railways along the Gyeonggi line that connects South Korea's Seoul and North Pyongyang, while the Donghae line connected the two Koreas through the eastern coastline. After blowing up the roads, the regime is said to be using heavy equipment to remove the broken pieces. The explosion itself is not surprising, as North Korea had already announced such a plan last week. In a message carried by the Korean Central News Agency, the General Staff of the North Korean People's Army said last Wednesday that a project will be launched that day to completely cut off roads and railways connected to South Korea. According to the sources from JCS, ever since that statement, hundreds of personnel with shovels and pickaxes have been working to plant explosives and then cover them with dirt.
Right. Bo-kyung, what has been the response from authorities here in South Korea then?
Well, firstly, the JCS said there has been no damage to South Korean forces because preparations had already been made to stay well clear. Yet the JCS stated that this is a clear violation of the armistice agreement. And as the explosion site was only 10 meters north of the MDL, it caused debris to fall south of the line, and the South Korean military reportedly returned fire to give a warning message to deter any further action. Several rounds were fired from K4 high-speed automatic grenade launchers and K6 heavy machine guns, aiming at the ground within South Korean territory, the south of the MDL, to avoid escalation. North Korea did not respond. Regarding the purpose of North Korea's move, JCS said it is in line with wiping out traces of unification after its leader Kim Jong-un defined the Koreas as two hostile states last year. It had already been taking steps to make two Koreas, and a JCS official added that the regime was aiming for some sort of dramatic effect. Now, the Unification Ministry, too, released its own statement calling it an abnormal action and adding that today's demolition of the inter-Korean roads is a clear violation of inter-Korean agreements and is repeating the action it had done 4 years ago. Take a listen.
This act is reminiscent of North Korea's abrupt destruction of the Inter-Korean Liaison Office 4 years ago that had been operating for over 1 year following joint agreements.
The ministry added that North Korea is still obliged to repay the loans used to build these roads, as the regime had been given funding worth over $132 million at the North's request. This is all I have for now. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Bo-kyung, thank you for that coverage. That was our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung reporting live from the Defense Ministry. And amid the aggravated animosity between the two Koreas, the Kremlin has taken steps to ratify its defense pact with Pyongyang that pledges swift military assistance if either one faces aggression. Our correspondent Kim Jung-sil reports.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has submitted a treaty on a comprehensive strategic partnership between Russia and North Korea to the State Duma, marking the next step in formalizing the agreement, Russia's TASS News reported on Tuesday. Signed on June 19, 2024 in Pyongyang, the treaty commits Russia and North Korea to maintain close cooperation, including military coordination in the case of an attack. Professor Kim Sun-rae of Hankuk University of Foreign Studies says this treaty has created a significant opportunity for North Korea after facing years of comprehensive UN sanctions since 2019.
By forging a military alliance with Russia, this offering the regime much needed relief, a strategic gain, so to speak.
Professor Kim emphasized that the treaty has significant implications for security on the Korean peninsula, adding that Russia might be the only country capable of restraining North Korea's provocations and military threats at this point.
Currently, North Korea is providing military support in the Ukraine war, and the possibility of deeper involvement cannot be ruled out. For peace and denuclearization on the peninsula, managing relations with Russia is as vital for South Korea's security as its alliance with the U.S.
The South Korean Foreign Ministry released a statement on Tuesday afternoon expressing concerns over the treaty amid North Korean actions that unilaterally and intentionally escalate tensions on the Korean peninsula. Seoul called on Russia to halt its illicit military cooperation with Pyongyang and to take a more constructive role in promoting peace and stability in the region. Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Russia's foreign ministry also appears to have placed its weight behind North Korea's recent allegations of drone incursions by South Korea. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji explains.
Tensions have been escalating since Friday when North Korea accused South Korea of sending drones carrying anti-Pyongyang propaganda leaflets over the regime.
If a South Korean drone is discovered in the sky over our capital city once again, it will lead to a horrible disaster.
Less than a week after vowing to take strong measures, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un convened a Defense and Security Council meeting, joined by top security officials. The North State media said Tuesday that Kim set forth the regime's direction of military action and indicated important tasks needed to defend its national security and sovereignty, but did not elaborate further on what they may be. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff has been saying that it cannot confirm the North's accusations and says the regime is responsible for raising tensions on the peninsula.
We've already said that our military is fully ready for any kind of provocation. North Korea is responsible for the current situation. The regime needs to stop sending trash balloons.
Separately, Russia blamed South Korea for raising tensions, saying Seoul violated Pyongyang's sovereignty. A Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson said in a statement on Monday local time that the South Korean authorities should take Pyongyang's warnings very seriously, adding that it should refrain from further provocations. In response, the South Korean government expressed deep regret over Russia supporting North Korea's claims that have not even been verified. Seoul says it wants an explanation as to why Russia didn't take any action when North Korean drones crossed into the south. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
Korea's island of Jeju saw its first public forum on government policies presided over by President Yoon Suk-yeol, who pledged to promote sustainable growth. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon has details.
South Korea's southernmost resort island of Jeju was President Yoon Suk-yeol's destination for his 29th public policy dialogue. On Tuesday, President Yoon, meeting with the citizens of the island, shared his vision for fostering it further with three main ideas: tourism development through connection and specialization, industrial growth leading cleanliness and innovation, and lastly, improved living conditions focused on practical change.
제주의 성장 잠재력은 그야말로 무궁무진합니다. 제주의 강점과 특성에 더욱 집중해서 확실한 발전 전략을 실천해 나간다면 훨씬 더 크게 도약할 수 있다고 저는 확신합니다.
President Yoon first said the urban air mobility industry will be supported within the island to boost tourism further. He noted that the island has the infrastructure and natural structure fit for UAMs to help travel, sightseeing, and shipping, which he says will be a UAM operation test zone. He also pledged to ramp up the building of a second airport on the island. The government announced basic plans last September as the current airport has been too busy. For reference, according to global travel data provider OAG, the flight route from Gimpo Airport in Seoul to Jeju International Airport is the world's busiest domestic flight route by seats. As for the eco-friendly aspect, President Yoon promised to foster the island as the nation's example for EV battery reuse. Yoon also touched on preserving the island's natural beauty while fostering new industries there. Jeju Island boasts UNESCO World Natural Heritage Sites. With it difficult for the island to obtain sources of energy and also having the biggest share of EVs in the nation, there will be support for EV battery recycling while fostering more hydrogen energy creation. President Yoon also made sure the citizens will have better living conditions, especially regarding the medical system.
그동안 제주도를 갖다가 서울 권역에 집어넣어서 이런 병원 기준을 운영을 해왔다는 거, 권역병원 기준을 운영해왔다는 것이 참 잘못된 것이고, 하여튼 저희들이 여기 상급 종합병원, 그 다음에 거점 진료센터들이 만들어져서 정부가 충분히 여기에 대해서는 재정 지원을 해가지고.
Yoon also noted better education will be provided so that the residents do not have to move to the mainland to pursue degrees. 김도현, Arirang News.
Now, prior to the public forum on the island of Jeju this afternoon, President Yoon Suk-yeol presided over a cabinet meeting at the Yongsan Presidential Office here in Seoul earlier on this Tuesday morning and called for bipartisan support to strengthen Korea's capital market by doing away with the financial investment income tax. Stressing his administration's efforts to enhance Korea's financial and economic policies to meet global standards, President Yoon added that it is now easier for global investors to buy and sell Korean bonds as Korea has been included in the World Government Bond Index. The inclusion is expected to attract as much as 75 trillion won in foreign investments and serve to strengthen the local currency as well. The Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences this year was awarded to 3 scholars who assert societies that are transparent and inclusive are more likely to prosper, and South Korea was cited as one such country. Our Choi Soo-young has more.
James Robinson, one of this year's Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences winners, commented that South Korea was one of world history's most amazing economic success stories. During an interview with South Korea's news agency Yonhap, Robinson, a professor at the University of Chicago, mentioned that despite the economy being centered around large companies, South Korea has always focused on exports, which has encouraged competition and efficiency. He added that a successful economic growth model of the past 50 years could continue. Additionally, he stressed that not only in industry but also in culture and arts, its inclusive systems have allowed creativity and innovation. His co-winners, Professors Darren Acemoglu and Simon Johnson from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, also praised South Korea as a prime example of economic growth based on good systems. On the other hand, they said it would be difficult for North Korea to change. Professor Acemoglu explained that before the South and the North were divided, both were similar. However, he said over time under different systems, the economic gap between South and North Korea grew more than tenfold. He also noted that after the South succeeded in its difficult democratization process, it experienced rapid growth in a healthy way. Professor Johnson added that the North's nuclear weapons and long-range missile programs were extremely dangerous. But he acknowledged that while South Korea still faces some challenges today, it has achieved remarkable success compared to other countries. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences awarded the Nobel Prize to Robinson, Acemoglu and Johnson on October 14th local time for their research on how national systems affect economic prosperity. The announcements of the Nobel Prize winners, which began on October 7th with the Prize for Medicine, concluded with the Economics Prize. The award ceremony will be held on December 10th, the anniversary of Alfred Nobel's death. Choi Soo-young, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed its trade on Monday at a fresh high. The index gained over 200 points from the previous session to end at more than 43,065. The S&P 500 also finished at an all-time high of almost 5,860, up nearly 45 points. Now, Monday's rally follows higher than expected third-quarter corporate earnings reports. In other news, Israel's military campaign in the Middle East targeting Hamas and Hezbollah continues to endanger the efforts of UN peacekeeping workers, especially in Lebanon. Our Park Gonu reports.
Global concerns rise over ongoing attacks in the Middle East. Through a statement on Monday, the UN Security Council strongly condemned Israel for the wounding of 5 UN interim force peacekeepers during recent Israeli attacks in southern Lebanon. Though not specifically mentioning Israel or the Hezbollah militants, the statement urged all parties to respect the safety and security of UNIFIL personnel and UN premises. It also pledged support for the peacekeepers while underscoring their role in protecting regional security. This comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu repeatedly warned UNIFIL to leave southern Lebanon temporarily as they are operating in the area. The council members also showed deep concern at civilian casualties, while saying all parties should comply with international humanitarian law. But on Monday, Israel expanded its targets to the northern part of Lebanon. According to Lebanon's health ministry, at least 21 people were killed and 8 injured during an airstrike. Israel has so far been mainly focusing on the suburbs of Beirut and south and east parts of Lebanon. Residents in Israel had to evacuate when projectiles were fired back across the border, although no injuries were reported. Israel also attacked the courtyard of the Al-Aqsa hospital in Gaza's Deir al-Balah, which left at least 5 people dead and dozens wounded. The Israeli military said they aimed to attack Hamas's command center near the hospital, while blaming the militant group for using civilian infrastructure. Park Gonu, Arirang News.
Samsung's Galaxy S24 Ultra has topped the latest smartphone rankings by Consumer Reports. This largest S-series device raked in 87 points with top marks in a number of categories, including camera, performance and reliability. According to the U.S. non-profit consumer agency, Galaxy S24 Ultra beat Apple's latest iPhone 16 model, but stood tied with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Korean shooter Yang Ji-in has been named the Athlete of the Year by the International Shooting Sport Federation. The announcement was made during the opening ceremony of the Federation's World Cup final in India on Tuesday. The 21-year-old Yang is the 4th title holder of Korean nationality, following Shin Chong-oh in 2008 and again in 2014, and Kim Chang-mi in 2012. Yang clinched gold at the 2024 Paris Olympics in the women's 25-meter pistol shooting event. The Athlete of the Year is selected via voting by the Federation's committees, coaches and reporters. 2 Korean screen productions, Exhuma and Handsome Guys, garnered much applause at this year's Sitges Film Festival in Spain. According to film distributor Showbox Today, Exhuma, a supernatural horror film starring Choi Min-sik and Kim Go-eun, won the Special Jury Award. Held from October 3rd to the 13th, Sitges is regarded as one of the top 3 fantasy and horror film festivals in the world. The black comedy horror film Handsome Guys, starring Kim Sung-min, was also awarded at the festival, bringing home the People's Choice Award.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. US space agency NASA launched its Europa Clipper spacecraft on Monday from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida on a long mission to Jupiter, where it will investigate the planet's moon, Europa, for signs of life. The Europa Clipper launched at 12:06 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time from Florida aboard a SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket to begin its 2.9 billion kilometer journey. The largest spacecraft NASA has ever built for a mission to an alien planet, the Europa Clipper is bound for Jupiter's fourth largest moon, where NASA's Galileo mission in the 90s found strong signs of an enormous subsurface ocean that may provide adequate conditions to support life. According to NASA, evidence suggests that a salty ocean with more water than all of Earth's oceans combined lies under Europa's surface layer of ice. The Europa Clipper is set to reach Jupiter's orbit in April 2030 and will fly past Europa 49 times. The mission, if successful, would determine the thickness of Europa's icy shell and its relation to the ocean below, as well as the composition and characteristics of its geology. India and Canada have expelled their top diplomatic envoys after authorities accuse agents of the Indian government of involvement in, quote, homicides, extortion and violent acts on Canadian soil. Canadian police on Monday said that Indian diplomats and consular officials were leveraging their position to engage in clandestine activities, including acts of violence against Sikh separatists in Canada, before the Canadian Foreign Ministry announced the expulsion of 6 Indian diplomats, including the High Commissioner. Later the same day, India's Foreign Ministry released a statement accusing Canada of being influenced by Sikh separatists and announced 6 Canadian diplomats, including the acting High Commissioner, had been asked to leave India by October 19th. The row stems from the murder of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar last year outside a Sikh temple in British Columbia. The World Health Organization said it received an additional $700 million in pledges for its 2025-2028 budget at the World Health Summit 2024 in Berlin on Monday, bringing the total pledges received to $1 billion. In addition to the $700 million, $300 million have already been pledged by the European and African unions. Germany, one of WHO's biggest donors, said it would provide around $400 million for the Geneva-based organization's next budget. Now, Chancellor Olaf Scholz encouraged other countries to pledge, saying every contribution counts, no matter how small. The Nepali teenage climber, who set the world record as the youngest person to summit the world's 14 highest peaks, has returned home a hero, receiving a warm welcome in the streets of Nepal's capital, Kathmandu. 18-year-old Nima Rinpoche Sherpa reached the 8,027-meter peak of Tibet's Shishapangma mountain last Wednesday to complete the final climb of the 14 mountains with summits that surpass 8,000 meters. The summits conquered by Nima include the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest, and K2, seen as one of the most dangerous peaks. Nima's exceptional achievement was confirmed by the Nepal Mountaineering Association, officially breaking the record of the previous youngest person, Mingma Gyabu David Sherpa, who achieved the feat at age of 30 in 2019. Kim Seong, Arirang News.
The highest daytime temperature in Seoul at this time of year is around 20 degrees Celsius. Seoul rose to 23 degrees in the middle of the day today, exceeding the previous year by about 3 degrees. Similar temperatures were felt in other areas as well. Meanwhile, tomorrow and Wednesday, daytime temperatures will rise higher than today, so there will be many places above 25 degrees. The weather is expected to get colder this week due to frequent autumn rain. At the beginning of the week, it will rain mainly in the Chungcheongdo provinces and southern regions, and at the end of the week, it will rain across the country. Tomorrow morning, Seoul will start off at 13 degrees, Gwangju 18 degrees. Highs will move up to 26 in Gwangju and Daegu, Gyeongju and Jeju 25 degrees. After a lot of rain nationwide on Friday, it is expected to get cold this weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session.
How to survive in Korea. One room. So, you're surviving in Korea. If you've signed a contract for a one room, obviously you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than milpaeyu nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
The sale of strollers for puppies here in South Korea is soaring, and this reality was recently covered by the Wall Street Journal as the country continues to combat the world's lowest birth rate. We have details on this edition of Press Perspective. Hello and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Press Perspective. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we touch upon a social trend of relative concern here in South Korea is highlighted by an American newspaper with regard to the popularity of strollers for puppies amid an alarmingly dismal birth rate. For this, I have the writer of the article, Dazzle Yoon, here in the studio. Dazzle, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
I also have Kelly Jo, editor for the Washington Post, with us as well. Kelly, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Right, Dazzle, we'll start with you then. Let's begin with the gist of your article for the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, so we all know that South Korea is the country with the lowest birth rate. This story I did last month shows how there's been a trend in recent years of this massive popularity of dog strollers in Korea. And, you know, if we go to malls here or parks here, we see dog strollers everywhere. And according to Gmarket, which is one of South Korea's largest online retailers, since last year, they've sold more dog strollers than baby strollers. And same with dog food. They've sold more dog food than baby formula. So this sort of shows how much people care about their pets, but also how much people are willing to treat their dogs as babies rather than having actual babies in Korea.
Right, and this was a coverage that you made earlier in September, right?
Yes.
And before we delve further into that report, how does this phenomenon, Kelly, of pampering pets here in South Korea compare to the reality in other countries like the US?
Well, in the U.S., we don't exactly have dog strollers everywhere, so there are some differences. But Americans really do love their pets. I read that about a quarter of South Koreans have a pet in their house. About 70% of American households have a pet. Pet products are a $147 billion industry in the U.S. That was the market size last year. I've heard stories about people going bankrupt, paying for their pet bills. I mean, they're certainly members of the family, and I think that's more and more becoming the case in South Korea. I do think that there are some cultural differences. In the U.S., pets are certainly part of the family, but in Korea, I think this is just my anecdotal experience, there's a little bit more anthropomorphizing of pets, dressing them up in clothes, pushing them in strollers, taking them to photo studios. Those things happen in the U.S., but not nearly as much. And another thing that I've noticed about Korea is that, you know, there's more community spaces where you can bring your pets. You can bring them to cafes, bars. I bring my dog to the grocery store and people don't seem to complain. And a lot of that is rooted in there's just less regulation here. And so it's kind of up to owners of businesses to create spaces for pets or not. Whereas in the US, there's a lot of red tape for these kind of things. But there's a lot of pampering happening in both countries, definitely.
Right. There are also holiday packages with your furry friends here in the country as well. Even Temple Stay I recently read.
I've looked at those.
Right. Right. Dazzle, you compare the soaring sales of strollers for puppies to, like you mentioned earlier, the faltering ones for babies, as many in the country choose not to have children. Now, based on your coverage, why are women in Korea not willing to start families?
I think it's really hard for us to point to one reason and say this is why people are not having babies in Korea, right? It's a mix of a wide variety of reasons. A lot of people talk about sort of the hyper-competitive society here. They talk about the lack of time for childcare. They also say, you know, long working hours, housing costs. You can point to a lot of, you know, reasons as to why people are not having babies here. And I think there's definitely a shift in mindset for the younger generation that they want to, you know, focus on their lives more than giving up their lives or their careers in order to, you know, have a family. And so at the end of the day, I think it's whether people living in this country feel like it's a livable country for the future generation, and whether they want to bring life after them, and whether, you know, they want to prioritize that over other things that they prioritize already, such as their career or, you know, whatever it is that people care about more.
All right, and these thoughts that you just mentioned, Dazzle, they also appear to be a universal trend. You said in your report that the reluctance to bear offspring is a global discourse. Kelly, I'm going to hand you this question. First, then, why does this phenomenon of being reluctant to bear offspring appear more prevalent, if I may, in wealthier countries like the US and South Korea?
Yeah, on one hand, this is a really hard question to answer because it's complex and there's a reason why so many countries haven't been able to fix it, despite their best efforts. At the same time, I think it's really simple. It's if you don't feel like you can take care of yourself, how are you going to take care of a child? And I think a lot of people, whether or not they can actually afford it, their perception of whether they can afford it is different. If you look at South Korea in particular, you know, I don't have the answers, but one thing that I thought was interesting is there's something called the Global Happiness Index. It's put out by a market research firm. And the latest one showed that South Koreans were tied for the least satisfied in general, the least happy, with Hungary. And if you look at economic indicators, they were among the most unhappy with how their country's economy looks, and they were the most unhappy with among the most unhappy with their own financial situation. And they were the most unhappy when it came to the type of material possessions that they personally have. Now, this is just a survey. It's not something that we should take with, you know, too much weight. But I do think it kind of indicates that, you know, within South Korea, there's a lot of pressure to, you know, have material goods to provide. And so I think there's a certain standard of living that people feel that they need to have for their children. And clearly they feel like they can't afford it. But this is also becoming the case in the US a little bit too. Families are happening later. The birth rates are going down, and the same in Europe as well. So I think it's just kind of this overall phenomenon of people feeling like or perceiving that they can't afford things, which this generation, the childbearing generation, certainly is more disadvantaged at large in a lot of these countries than their parents, their grandparents' generation.
Right. Dazzle, for the sake of some perspective then, do share with us some of the alarming statistics with regard to Korea's birth rate and, of course, the prospects of its population some 50 years down the road, which I believe some pundits are saying our population of 51 million at present will be halved by then. How do these numbers for Korea also compare with those of its global partners?
So South Korea's birth rate right now, they're at a third of the level needed in order to maintain the population.
Which is 2.1 then?
Yes. And so that is quite alarming, and there is a reason why South Korean newspapers are always talking about, you know, the country going extinct and how and when it will go extinct. And the projections are grim as well, because if we look at what government agencies are saying, they're saying that in the coming decades, South Korea's population could hit a point where it's as low as it was in the 1970s. In comparison, countries like the US, like Kelly mentioned, for example, yes, birth rates are falling there as well, and the US has seen historic lows in terms of, you know, their birth rates. But at the same time, if we look at certain projections in the coming decade, it's actually seen that it will rise slightly more from what it is now. And that's, you know, because of several different factors. For example, because, you know, women who are giving childbirth, their, you know, age is going up, and there are lots of factors that contribute to that. But in terms of South Korea, you know, the future seems bleak, and that is why a lot of government agencies have been, you know, putting their heads together and trying to figure out how do we encourage people to have more babies here.
Right, and speaking of that, Kelly, the Yoon administration, it has been seeking to tackle the nation's dismal birth rate. Could you tell us a bit about the measures announced, and which initiative do you suppose looks to be more productive?
Well, honestly, I certainly can't advise on this issue. It's an ongoing problem. I've reported on it before years ago during the Moon administration, and we're seeing the same issues. And honestly, a lot of similar efforts. I think several of the last presidential administrations have been concerned about this. With Yoon, what I think is interesting is declaring this national population emergency, looking at potentially establishing a ministry or some kind of presidential cabinet or secretary position to deal with this. From what I've seen, there's a lot of, you know, talk about creating extended paternity leave, creating some kind of emergency leave for if your child gets sick for 2 weeks, things like that. And I guess what I wonder is whether or not people will actually use those benefits. One thing that I've observed about Korea is that, for instance, menstrual leave. Women have a right to menstrual leave every month, but do they take it? A lot of them don't because they feel pressure at work that they can't. And I think we see that with maternity leave and certainly paternity leave as well. I think less than 7% of fathers in South Korea actually take paternity leave, and I know from my own family members who are Korean, they've often said to me, I've had one kid, I can't have another, because they've already taken their time. And so there's a lot of unsaid, tacit pressure on people in South Korea to not actually use the benefits that are given to them. In the past, there's certainly been, financial benefits given to parents, literally cash stipends, things like that, that deplete as the children age, and I think those are helpful. What I've heard from parents when I have reported on this is that it's nice, but it's not enough. It's not enough to make someone actually decide to have a child, but if you do have one, it's, a nice touch. And so I think all these measures are good, but clearly this is a problem that's happening in a lot of very economically developed countries, and I honestly don't know what the solution is, and I think governments are also grappling with this question.
Right, they really are, and this is an impromptu question then. Dazzle, what are your thoughts on efforts by the Yoon administration to deal with the dismal birth rate, such as extending paternity leave or offering more childcare services to mothers and fathers? What are your thoughts about on these initiatives?
I think a couple months back we also did a story about how the Yoon administration has sort of increased these cash payouts to people too, basically saying we will give you money if you have a baby, right? If you have one child, we will support this. We will support your baby formula expenses or taking your kids to school, et cetera, et cetera. And none of it worked. I think even then, we saw a constant decline in the birth rate. In surveys, we saw people talking about how, no, this doesn't quite change our minds about whether or not we want to have babies. And I think the reason for that is because it's not necessarily about a shift in policy that's going to change people's minds. It's going to be about, the social norms and about the culture and, the workplace that they're in. A lot of different factors that will influence their thinking in terms of what I mentioned before, which is this a livable country for the future generation? And I think, younger people are thinking more about that. Do I actually want a child to live in the same or similar environment that I have lived in?
Right, then staying with that, some people are indeed saying, like you and also Kelly mentioned earlier, that basically we need to have a shift in social norms about family structures, about working parents. There are some people suggesting that the idea of having children after marriage should also change. What are your thoughts on this?
So I recently saw this survey that asked South Koreans, what do you think is needed in order to balance your work life with your life at home? And a lot of people said we need time for childcare, and that ties into a lot of different things, which is working hours, but also culturally, societally, are they allowed to take the parental leave that is there as a policy? And Kelly mentioned this earlier, but it's a different story when the government says we're going to extend parental leave, and they say we want more men taking paternity leave, and them going to work and seeing that no one else is doing it, especially fathers, right? Or if they feel like there is this pressure that they may have to compromise their career if they do take the parental leave. I think that's why, we have to think about how to change the social norms rather than constantly pushing for new policies, new cash payouts. Those are good. As mentioned before, those are good for people who are already willing to have babies and already have their mindset on having children. But for people who are like, no, I don't want children, I would rather, pamper my dog, I think it's a whole different, story.
Right, and Kelly, this is also an impromptu question. Based on what Dazzle has said, do you suppose introducing perhaps a 4-day work week system for the younger generation would perhaps encourage them to start families?
I mean, it might. I mean, I think this is a multi-pronged issue. If you look at the younger generations, like Gen Z people in the United States, for example, they are having less social connection, intimate relations than previous generations. So I think at the very basis of starting a family, there's finding a partner to start that family with, and then you have to worry about things like, do you have enough money? Do you have enough time to raise a child? Can you actually use the benefits that are available to you? I think work-life balance could have an effect. I'm not sure if it's the silver bullet to solve the issue, but I mean, just in terms of mental health and, other things, it's certainly a good idea, and we see it in practice in parts of Europe and elsewhere, and who knows. But I do think that something like that would be quite radical for South Korea, and also the United States, to be honest, which is a country that's pretty obsessed with productivity.
And Kelly, if I were to ask you to perhaps highlight one country that Korea could look to as an example for some guidance with regard to encouraging couples to have children, which country would you care to highlight?
That's a tough one. I did look. I think that this is such an issue around the world that it is kind of difficult to solve. As we mentioned earlier, the United States is seeing record lows for birth rates. Then again, the United States allows in a lot of immigrants, and that certainly helps. And I've seen some, white papers talking about how immigration might be one way to deal with this if you're really concerned about your population. In Europe, birth rates have fallen every year almost since 1960. If you look at the trend line, it's pretty down. But it varies a lot within European countries. For instance, France, I think, has a lot of social benefits, a very good social system, and so their birth rate might be higher than, say, Ukraine. So it's really hard to look at one country that has had this problem as acutely as South Korea and has fixed it, because I don't think such a country exists, quite frankly.
Right. And Dazzle, in the meantime then, do dog stroller makers believe their sales will continue to remain high in the country?
So the dog stroller companies that I've spoken with, they say that the peak appears to be, over. Like, it was really a couple years ago that they were selling the most dog strollers, because a lot of people were just seeing it around them and, willing to buy them. But I think there's an expectation that the market will continue to flourish, because South Koreans, they're one of the countries where the number of pets is rising, consistently, as opposed to countries like the U.S. where pretty much everyone already has a dog. I think in the U.S. it's like 70% of people have dogs. In Korea, we're at about like 20-something% right now. So there's room for growth, and seeing the different types of things that are coming out for dogs. For example, I've seen omakase for dogs now. I've seen 5-star hotels offer bathrobes for dogs. I've also seen, or I've also heard our interviewees talk about how they spend hundreds of dollars on sweaters and supplements for their dogs. So there is a lot of room for growth in this market, even if it's not, necessarily more people are going to buy dog strollers.
And the stroller that you introduced in your article cost over $1,000 US, am I right?
Yes, there was one company where their strollers were quite expensive, and they were sort of targeting a niche group of people who wanted to show that they have luxury taste and that they're willing to spend, this much money on their pets. So their strollers were, going beyond $1,000 US. They had, they were using special cushions. They were going through special safety regulations that were set in Germany for baby strollers. So a lot of companies are going to extravagant means to kind of create luxury items for dogs in Korea.
For consumers who are willing to splurge then on their furry friends. Kelly, an article by the New York Times published this past weekend, I believe, also highlighted the growing companionship sought in pets by the elderly here in Korea. Now, this, of course, is a universal trend, right, given the health benefits of having pets for seniors.
Yeah, I mean, this is actually something that I've thought about a lot in my personal life. I've seen how pets could help, my grandparents. I think, I've seen white papers that suggest that loneliness can actually be a higher danger or risk to your health than smoking or obesity. And certainly, I think we all might be able to relate to the fact that, when people are very old, in their 80s and beyond, just a small change in their routine can really kind of trigger a decline. And so I think pet ownership also keeps people to a certain schedule. It gives them a certain bar for physical activity. I've seen stories about, little robot seals being brought into nursing homes in Japan. I see that, dogs are volunteered into elderly care facilities in the U.S. And so it's certainly a benefit. And I would say, like, as someone in their 30s, my dog gets me up in the morning and forces me to get some fresh air outside. And I think that's good for my mental and physical health. I probably get more steps in every week because of him. And so I can see how there's a lot of benefits for sure. There's also a really high cost to having pets, but there's a lot that it can bring to your life for sure.
Right, indeed, which is why dog strollers here are soaring in sales. All right, then I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition. Kelly, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts here. And Daza, thank you very much for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.
Completely new. But something anyone can relate with.